Good evening and welcome to Monsters Among Us. I am your guide, Derek Hayes. Ladies and gentlemen, it's finally here. The reason we endure the other 364 days. The darkest, spookiest, most exciting time of the year. It's Halloween evening, and here at Monsters Among Us, we know exactly what to do. Now I have one hell of a program slated for you this evening. All the Halloween staples will be represented. All the lore and legends will be explored. Your blood will curdle. Your hair may turn white. Fun will be had by all. So, let's break the seal and unleash tonight's first submission. A tale about either a time slip or perhaps the zombie apocalypse. Regardless, here's Nicole's entry out of Colorado.
Hi, Derek and team. My name is Nicole, and I'm calling from Denver, Colorado. So I have a story from my grandmother. She passed away when I was just 6 years old, so I was too little for her to tell me the story directly, but I grew up with my mom telling me this story many, many times. So basically, back in the 70s, my grandparents lived in Norwalk, California. And one night, they decided they needed to go run an errand. They needed to go to the grocery store. So my grandmother, my grandfather, and my cousin, who was just a little girl at the time, got in the car, went to the grocery store. On their way home, they stopped at, now, I believe it was a railroad crossing, but it could be a red light. That's the only detail I don't remember for sure. Unfortunately, my mother passed away in 2017, so I'm not able to ask her. So they were stopped either at this railroad crossing or a light, and they noticed, my grandparents noticed, that cars parked on either side of them were all older model cars, like probably from the 40s and 50s, and that everybody occupying these cars, men, women, and children, they all looked dead. They were all slumped over. Their skin had like a pale or greenish pallor to it. No one was moving. They were all dressed in clothes which would line up with the 40s and 50s era. And again, nobody was moving. Everybody was just like slumped over in these cars, appearing to be dead. And there were several cars again. Needless to say, this really freaked out my grandparents. They got out of there as soon as they could and went straight home. Now, my mother had stayed home. She had not gone with them to the grocery store. But she recalls clearly, even though she was just a kid, she recalls that when my grandparents got home, she remembers they were both shaken and visibly upset and frightened. She had never seen her parents frightened like that before, so it was quite upsetting to her, and she knew something serious had to have happened. My grandmother called the police and reported what had occurred, and later on, she was contacted by the police department and told that an officer or officers had gone out to investigate, but they did not find anything. No old-fashioned cars, no appearing to be dead people in the cars. At that spot, nothing. So over the years, my family and I, we've always questioned, could this have been an elaborate prank? But, I mean, it's not quite logical. I mean, who would do such an elaborate prank? What would be the purpose? How would you get kids involved to the point where they would sit there still and pretend to be dead? I do believe that there are things out there that we don't understand, but I am somewhat of a skeptic. So if there's a logical explanation, I'm happy to find one. But my grandparents were convinced that those are real corpses in the cars and that it was something unnatural. So yeah, that's one of my interesting family stories that's been passed down through the ages. I just want to say, Derek, I love your show so much. Thank you for all your hard work. I am a Patreon supporter, and I've been listening to you for a couple years now, and you are absolutely my favorite podcast. Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you, Nicole. Now, in reality, I doubt this has anything to do with the zombie apocalypse. Not only because the bodies were not reanimated, but also because of the sudden appearance of the older vehicles. Even if the dead did return, I doubt they would bring a Model T Ford with them. So outside of some sort of shared psychosis, that pretty much leaves us with a time slip. A slip to what time period I could not tell you, because I cannot think of a scenario where that many people died in their vehicles on the road for no obvious reason, and we not already know about it. So maybe this was a slip sideways into a parallel dimension where something terrible did take place. A bomb went off, a sudden natural event, like a solar flare, earthquake, or something. Or, of course, a fast-acting, highly contagious disease. Now, regardless of what it was, this story was the perfect way to kick off this Halloween episode. So thank you again, Nicole, for sharing. Now, if you'd like to share your own tale here on the program, a true tale, call our hotline at 888-608-NIGHT. That's 888-608-NIGHT. Or record a voice memo on your phone and email it to me at monstersamonguspodcast@gmail.com. Now, in the interest of getting as many calls in tonight as we can, I will not be doing much deep diving on this week's episode. But don't fret, we have plenty of Halloween-related stories to share this evening, like this witchy entry out of the state of Arizona. Welcome to the program, Abby.
Hi, this is Abby from Flagstaff again. I just called in about a skinwalker experience that I had, and the story I'm about to tell was actually the weekend before that experience, where me and my partner, again, were walking our dog, and we have a few different routes in this neighborhood. You know, Flagstaff, for some context, is right by the four corners of the Navajo Nation. I think it's like an hour and a half from where we live. So, you know, we constantly get stories and things like that. You know, we had an experience just a little bit ago from a skinwalker, and this story is just like really confusing to me, and I guess it's just kind of interesting and I want to share it. So me and my partner were walking in our neighborhood, and this neighborhood has no sidewalks. It does not have street lamps, you know, but people are really cool about putting up lights on their fences and, you know, paving the road nice so that you can walk. And anyways, so we're going on this walk, and we take a longer route because we would just want some exercise and had to get the dog out. So we're walking, and we get to this turn, and it's not a cul-de-sac. It was just kind of a turn on the road so that we could go uphill and return home. And it was kind of weird because, you know, it's the middle of summer, you hear crickets, you hear people in their homes, but this part of the neighborhood is always really quiet, and I'm not really sure why. I don't know if it's like a bunch of older adults or what, but it's really quiet, and it was, you know, nothing odd, but we were like, yeah, kind of tired, just want to go home. And we passed by this house, and this woman is cackling, and I mean witch cackling, like from a movie. At first, me and my partner look at each other and we kind of laugh, and we're like, oh man, she's like watching something really funny, or, you know, she's having a really funny conversation, because, I mean, you could hear her down the street. She was laughing and cackling so profusely and loudly. And, you know, at first we're laughing, and you give it like a minute or two, and you're like, well, it's obviously not the TV, because you can't hear the TV, and also if somebody's laughing at the TV, you're just kind of like pausing and then laughing and then pausing and then laughing. It wasn't that, and we didn't think it was a phone call for the same reason. Like, if you're on the phone, you're like waiting for someone to respond and then you're laughing. No, it was like continuous, profound, like extreme cackling. Like, I don't know how else to say it. I mean, I would mimic it if I wouldn't blow out the speakers in everybody's cars and phones. But it was shocking. And so we get up the hill, and we're continuing to walk, and we can still hear her. I'm talking like 10 houses down the street. You can hear her cackling. It just sent chills in my body. And I mean, it's probably nothing supernatural or anything like that, but it was so interesting. And like, again, the neighborhood was just so silent, and it was the only thing that you could hear, and there was no crickets, there was no nothing. And it was just kind of just super odd. And if anybody else has some like crazy witch cackling stories, I mean, I'd love to hear them. It's, super interesting at the very least. So thanks. Bye.
Thank you, Abby. What is more Halloweeny than a witch-like cackle in the night? Or maybe it was some sort of jokester out there playing a prank. Perhaps it was someone in distress, and their cries for help were mistook as laughter. Or maybe there is a witch wandering the mountains of Arizona. Then, of course, you have the most likely scenario of them all: a cackling coyote. You see, Arizona's full of them, and they often make calls that sound eerily similar to the laughter or even the cackle of a woman. Here are a couple quick examples. Now, if you have a dog or a cat nearby, the sound might drive them crazy. In that case, skip ahead about 30 seconds. Now, I can tell you from experience that it sounds even more human-like when you're out there in the woods with them. Now, of course, I wasn't there. I didn't hear these sounds, so these are easy guesses for me to make. That doesn't mean that what Abby encountered wasn't somehow paranormal. But regardless of what it was, we thank you again, Abby, for ringing in. And here, folks, we need to take our first break of the evening. But when I come back, no Halloween episode would be complete without a series of monsters. And I have them in spades right after these messages.
We'll move 590.
Party decorations. Mask.
California's up.
We'll go with it.
We'll talk about what
One of my favorite parts about the holiday is all the monsters. Mummies, vampires, ghosts, ghouls, goblins, witches, devils, demons, beasts, boogers, and bad guys. And that's just what's trick-or-treating down your street. So for these next few entries, let's focus on the monsters of Halloween. Those things that go bump in the night. And what says Halloween more than a big black cat? Jeff from Minnesota. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Derek. My name is Jeff. I live in Mankato, Minnesota. And this is an ABC call, one of those alien big cats. I've looked into it a lot now because I know I saw it. My girlfriend, she saw it because I thought this was a house cat at first. Me and my girlfriend, we were going to our dumpsters to put stuff away. And we sometimes drive to it because it's a little bit far and a lot of trash. But anyways, I see, I originally think a house cat on the side of the road. And it's a fully black. And I love black cats, so I'm like, okay, save it. I jump out of my car to go after it. And as soon as I got within 30 yards of it, I immediately realized, I was like, that is the size of my dog. I have an Australian Shepherd, 50-pound dog. As soon as I saw this cat, I stopped in my tracks. And it looked right at me, too. It was a beautiful animal, but I just can't understand what it is because I've looked into it. I don't know if anyone's posed this, but I thought that might be a melanistic bobcat, a black bobcat. There's only been like 20 sightings that I can find. I mean, it's either so rare or I don't know what it was that I saw, but I know for a fact I saw it, and my girlfriend saw it, because she was like, oh, it's a little cat too, and then as soon as I told her, like, stay in the vehicle, it was like, oh, it's something more. Anyways, that's really all I got for you. I love your show so much. It's been a favorite of mine for I don't know how long now. And yeah, keep doing what you're doing. Thanks, man. Bye.
Well, Jeff, it's a good thing that you didn't get a hold of it, or that it didn't get a hold of you, because that sounds like an ABC encounter to me. Now, Jeff is right. There aren't a lot of reports of melanistic or black bobcats here in North America. In fact, as of 2016, only 12 had been recorded. And I've linked to a story about one that a mighty hunter killed. There are photos, but be warned, they were taken after the animal was dispatched. But a bobcat isn't all that much bigger than, say, a Maine Coon house cat. They're not as large as people assume they would be. To put it in perspective, the largest bobcat ever recorded was less than 50 pounds. And it sounds like to me that whatever Jeff saw was bigger than even the nimble bobcat, which makes this even harder to identify. Now, black cats aren't the only creatures covered on tonight's Halloween broadcast. How about a visit from little green men? Will from Wisconsin. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Derek. My name is Will from Wisconsin. I've called in once before, and this is the only other paranormal story that I have. Both of them actually happened with my grandmother, which is kind of weird, but totally different kinds of stories. So this one is relatively short. She was visiting us down in Atlanta, Georgia, where I grew up. And we were coming back, I think, from going to lunch somewhere. And just walking out of the car to our house, and I happened to look up, and there was a small object up in the sky. It was a disc shape, sort of a traditional UFO-shaped object. But the weird thing to me, and I think I've heard other people with similar stories at this point, but the thing that creeped me out when I was a kid was that there was sort of a red ring inside the outer ring of the UFO, and it looked open, or maybe a window. And inside could actually see what I thought were tiny, maybe aliens or whatever is in the UFO looking down. And, I might have chalked that up to, my childhood imagination, but what I do remember is that my grandma actually came and, looked up with me, and she saw it too. She verified what we saw. We went and told my mom, and of course, later on, she didn't believe us. So that's the only other, paranormal story that I've had. I've not heard of a lot of people that have had an encounter with a similar UFO where they talked about people looking down, but I think I've heard it at least a couple times. But yeah, hopefully you can use that story. Thank you for the show. I know you say you don't want to necessarily be compared to Art Bell, and you're certainly very different, but I think you're continuing on the legacy of giving folks with paranormal experiences a place to be heard. So thank you very much, and have a good night.
Thank you, Will. All right, they weren't green, but they were little, and they were creepy as all get out, staring down from their hovering craft. Now, by the way, this detail might sound a bit outlandish, but remember, in the early moments of Betty and Barney Hill's abduction experience, they too claimed to see figures moving about inside a hovering craft. Countless other lesser-known cases describe the exact same thing as well. So while this claim may sound a bit off the wall, keep in mind this sort of thing happens from time to time. Now, if aliens don't do it for you, perhaps a werewolf will. Please welcome Asher from Massachusetts.
Hey, my name's Asher. I'm calling from Massachusetts. This is actually a friend's story, though. It happened near Haddam, Connecticut. He did give me permission to share. He just didn't really want to himself. So me and my fiance and another friend were sitting there waiting for this friend, I'll call him N, to get in. We're all going to hang out. And we were just listening to Dogman Encounters radio. And so my friend N came in and listened for a minute, and he got this weird look on his face, and he was like, that's interesting you guys are listening to this. I saw a really weird coyote the other day. This was probably 2019 or 2020, around springtime. So he works at a popular gas station convenience store chain. He opens for them at like 5 in the morning. So he was getting up at like, 4 in the morning to drive there, probably earlier. And he was at the time living in an old hunting cabin out in Haddam, Connecticut, somewhere near there on a lake. So any of you that know that area know it's very rural. So he was driving to work one morning, clear morning, sun wasn't quite up yet, and he saw this coyote. What he thought was a coyote. He was like, it was huge though. Our friend that we were with used to have a German Shepherd that was a little over 100 pounds, and he said this coyote was bigger than the Shepherd. What he thought was weird was he slowed down to let it cross the road because it was peeking out of some very tall grass on the side of the road. And when he stopped, it took a few steps towards the car, so he was able to see the whole body. He said the front half was higher than the back. It had very, very long front legs, and he said the lower joint of the front legs was like longer than it should have been. And he did say that the paws almost looked like hands. He said the nails and the fingers, for lack of a better word, were like longer than they should be. But my friend, being my friend, just kind of, his window was open, and he just kind of said, hey there, buddy, can you cross the road? I gotta go to work. And he said this thing just kind of lowered its head at him and looked at him for a minute and backed into the grass that it was coming out of. Said the way it moved was very unsettling. He said it sort of rolled its shoulders and its joints, and it never took its eyes off of him, and it just backed back into the grass. He doesn't live there anymore, but he never did see it again. Not really sure what that was. It was on all fours the whole time. I don't know that I've ever heard any other dogman encounters in Connecticut, but, doesn't mean there aren't any. So, yeah, not sure what he saw out there, but anybody that's in Connecticut that's seen something like that, I would love to hear about it, and so would he. But, yeah, that's my friend's encounter in Connecticut. Thank you.
Thank you, Asher, for sharing your friend's story. Another Connecticut canine. I've shared a handful of stories from the Constitution State that seem to describe this exact same thing. Season 17, Episode 14 featured a story by Kyle, who saw a muscled-up werewolf-like creature eating roadkill along the road with its hands. And on Season 14, Episode 18, Sean shared a story about a large growling beast that chased him off his favorite Connecticut fishing hole. And there is a very popular story going around the paranormal circles about an EMT's run-in with several of these creatures in the exact same state. What I'm getting at here is that there seems to be something strange running around the streets of Connecticut. Something tall, something hairy, something canine, and something scary. And if history tells us anything, is that just such a thing may be possible. Have you ever heard of Connecticut's Glowacus?
Oh, it was a dark and stormy night.
It's 1939 in Glastonbury.
Small animals, dogs and cats were being attacked, and then it started becoming something otherworldly. And I think at one point there were combinations of panther, bear, dog, cat.
The tales spread far and wide. It wasn't long before that beast got its name, courtesy of a Hartford Courant reporter, Francis King.
Whack us. Glastonbury, wacky us. Nobody ever caught it. We don't have any photos of it. It's very much like Bigfoot and the Loch Ness Monster.
Now that clip on behalf of WVIT, NBC News, Connecticut. And at first glance, it looks like we have our culprit. The Glowacus is described as looking like something between a bear, a panther, and a lion. And it's also been known as the Northern Devil Cat. Now, images of this creature seem to be dead on with Asher's description. But it's hard to know if we can take these sightings in this story seriously. It's commonly accepted that this is a creature created by lumberjacks in the late 1800s. But I've linked to all kinds of content on the Monstrum Infandrum Gallinobacus, as it was also called. Just visit our show notes at monstersamonguspodcast.com and hit the show notes tab. And while you're there, be sure to visit the shop tab as well to pick up a piece of Monsters Among Us gear today. And if you're one of those that pre-ordered a Monsters Among Us hoodie this year, first off, thank you. You made a wise choice. Second off, those hoodies left our printers, Streetlight Printing in Ohio, earlier this week and should be in our mailroom by this weekend, aka our basement. And once they're here, Sarah will get those things shipped out to you within the week, just in time for these cooler temperatures to roll in. Oh, I almost forgot. A cool little tidbit. There's a soccer team in Connecticut that has the Galawackas as its mascot. Hartford Athletics mascot is Dylan, the Galawackas. Again, you can learn more in the show notes. Now it's time for me to take another break, but when we come back, time to explore the ghostly side of All Hallows Evening.
Sports even
Halloween, doesn't miss it.
But the moon rose, he turned into a werewolf.
Now, a longtime favorite activity on October 31st is telling ghost stories. So grab a seat while Maria spins us a yarn.
Hi, Derek. My name is Maria. I am calling from Central Florida. This story actually belongs to my father. So it takes place in 1982. This was before I was born, and it takes place in Jacksonville, Florida. My father is a physician, and at the time he was having to repeat a lot of credits due to the fact that he was a foreign doctor. He had moved from Nicaragua, so they were requiring him to repeat a lot of his training. So because of that, he was putting in extra hours at a clinic in Woodbine, Georgia, which was about an hour and a half from Jacksonville where they lived. So in order to get there on time, he would leave very early on a Saturday morning. He would leave around 4:30 from Jacksonville, and in order to get out of Jacksonville, normally you have to cross a series of bridges. And there was one bridge that he would cross that was a cast iron bridge, kind of an older bridge that's not around anymore. But if you've ever seen those cast iron bridges, they have a lot of metal workings on them that kind of resemble a lattice shape. So this particular morning, he was crossing the bridge. It was still very dark outside. He said he normally didn't see a lot of cars around this time. So as he was crossing the bridge, he says a few feet in front of him, he saw a woman run from one side of the bridge to the other, a few feet in front of him, kind of full speed. He said she was dressed in white, which I think is kind of funny because it sounds a little bit like a stereotypical haunting, but she runs across the bridge and kind of just disappears when she gets to the other side. So if you've ever seen these bridges, it's not exactly easy to jump over them. You kind of have to climb a little bit and kind of get yourself over a railing in order to really jump off the other side. He said that he did not see that happen. She kind of just disappeared. So he kind of chalked it up to, I'm probably not getting enough rest, I'm a little bit overworked. So he just kept on driving. Again, he didn't see anybody else around, so he kept driving to the very end of the bridge. When he got to the end of the bridge, though, he noticed there was a cop tailing him with the lights on to pull him over. So he pulls over thinking, I wasn't sure. Maybe I didn't realize it, but I didn't think I was speeding or anything like that. So the cop pulls him over, he kind of rolls down the window. He says, "Hi, officer, can I help you?" And he says, "Yes." He said, "I just wanted to know, what are you doing out around this time? It's kind of early." And he said, "Well, I'm a physician and, I drive to Georgia to work on Saturdays and I have to leave pretty early to get there on time." So the cop goes, "Okay." He says, "Well, did you see anything back there when you were on the bridge?" And my father says, "Yes, I did." And he describes what he saw to him. And the policeman, he just kind of nodded and And he said, I saw the same thing too, but I didn't see anybody jump off. He kind of just corroborated what my father had seen as well. And he said, well, that's all I wanted to know. Have a good day. And he let my father go. So it was just a very odd encounter. My father believes that the policeman had seen something like that before, and this was the first time that there was someone else on the road at the time that could really corroborate what he had seen, because he said the policeman didn't really even show any kind of concern that someone might have taken their life. So anyway, that's my father's story. I thought it was interesting, and keep up the good work. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. Another Halloween staple. A lady in white ghost. On a bridge, no less. That almost has a Sleepy Hollow vibe to it. Now, another style of haunting popular this time of year is the classic haunted house. Slamming doors, flashing lights, blood on the countertops. Justin from Wyoming. Welcome to tonight's show.
Hi, Derek. This is Justin from Casper, Wyoming again. I told you I'd call and tell you a good ghost story, haunted house story. This one took place in Casper, Wyoming in 1984. And my family had moved into a house out in an area called Paradise Valley. I believe this house was on a street called Sunflower. And it was near an area where people believe the Battle of Red Butte occurred. And that was a battle between Native Americans and U.S. Union soldiers that were stationed at Fort Casper. It wasn't Fort Casper then, but it became Fort Casper. So in this house, it started out as we moved in with the children in the house as being pretty young and not able to reach the thermostat. But at night, my parents would wake up and the thermostat would be turned up to 90 degrees. And they would come and check on the kids. And we'd have all our covers kicked off and just be happy as clams and no big deal. And some of these things I observed, some of these were told to me by my parents. But one evening, they were watching television and a blue ball of light about the size of a basketball shot from one wall through the living room in front of them and out the other wall. They both looked at each other just stunned and didn't even say anything to each other at the moment and just went back to watching TV. My father would repeatedly be woken up in the night where he thought someone was shining a spotlight in his face. He'd open his eyes and see a super bright light, and then it'd just disappear, but wake him up. Another event that occurred was my mother was in the kitchen doing things during the middle of the day, and my father was out of town for work, and she left the kitchen and came back in a few minutes later, and there was blood everywhere on the counter, just covered in blood. So she thought my dad came home early, started calling for him, no answer, walked around the house, came back, no blood, nothing in the kitchen, totally clean. But it wasn't just my house that happened in. The neighbors' houses were affected as well. I remember a time we were at the neighbor's house, and they had a downstairs, we didn't. And my mother, the neighbor woman, and all us kids were downstairs in the basement watching a movie. And we could hear doors slamming and someone walking around upstairs. And so my mother and the woman next door, they went up to investigate, scared. And all the doors were locked, all the windows were locked. There was no one in the house, and that was a common occurrence for them. Their daughter also reported seeing a Native American standing at the end of their hallway, which was odd with our hallway as well, because my mom would find me as a kid talking to someone in our hallway and ask me who I was talking to, and I would just say the man that's up in the corner. And also we had a dog who would refuse to go down that hallway, would just sit at the end of that hallway and growl and bark, but refuse to go down there. So that's just a story of a haunted house we lived in when I was a kid. So hope you can use it, and you have a good one.
Thank you, Justin. the Battle of Red Butte, or the Battle of Platte Bridge as it's often called. July 26, 1865. Members of the Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho nations strategically attacked a supply wagon train some 5 miles away from Fort Caspar. 20-some soldiers were dispatched to escort the wagon train back to the fort. And that's when all hell broke loose. 8 Native warriors lost their lives, and 29 U.S. troops were killed in the skirmish. Now, the location of this battle has yet to be confirmed, so it could be under the house that Justin had mentioned, there in Paradise Valley. Or it could be miles away on a private ranch somewhere. But given all the activity that Justin brought up, I wouldn't be surprised if it was right there in his neighborhood. Either way, we thank you again, Justin, for calling in.
Mark on everything with the best. The talk of the voices you.
Gosh, Brother Chef, it's more fun than a werewolf.
Now, how many of you like to play sleepover games growing up on this, the spookiest night of the year? Light as a feather, stiff as a board, Bloody Mary, the Ouija board, or the triple mirror game. Well, Alyssa in Oregon grew up playing these games, and she's coming in with a story about a game I'd never heard of. A game that apparently gets results.
Hi, my name is Alyssa, and currently I live in Central Oregon. The story I want to tell happened years ago. God, I'm 24 now, so this would have been 10 years ago when I was 14. Also in Central Oregon, this took place in September of 2014. It was my friend's 15th birthday, and we were having a sleepover with a bunch of us girls. I wasn't a big fan of regular sleepovers. I didn't really know the other girls too well, but in a way to connect, I thought maybe we could play some silly, cheesy, spooky games. So I encouraged them to try and do stiff as a board, light as a feather, Ouija board, Bloody Mary, and nothing really worked. So after the sleepover, the girls went home the next morning, and I stayed another night with my friend. And I really wanted to see if one of those games would work. Hindsight, in my part, is 2020. Don't play scary games because they might have weird consequences. But I didn't know, and I was curious, so we played a game called Cat Scratches. In Cat Scratches, you have 3 people. One person sits down, crisscross applesauce. Another person lays down on their back with their head in the lap of the person sitting crisscross. And the third person sits at the feet of the person laying down. We play this game. Essentially, you turn off the lights. The person sitting down tells a story. And when you turn the lights on, the one laying down is supposed to sit up and have scratches on their back. We did it one time. Turned on the lights. I should clarify, we played this game using her 10-year-old little sister as our test dummy. That's not the best, but we play the game, nothing happens, but I have this weird feeling that it'll work. So we do it a second time, and I reread the story. I repronounce these weird words that were in between the paragraphs. I don't want to repeat them because they creep me out, but when we turned on the lights, her little sister sat up, and when she lifted up the back of her shirt, clear as day, there were scratch marks all over her back. Nothing tearing the skin, but there were just straight red lines. It looked like someone took their hand and just scratched across her skin. We all were just horrified. We were in tears. Her little sister, me, and my friend. And I have no explanation for it. I haven't to this day. Yeah, I've thought all the possibilities of what it could be. Maybe the little sister scratched her back, but I would have felt it because her head was on, my knees. Still, I don't know. Following that, I had a bunch of horrifying, weird experiences, but that's besides the point. If you guys have any insight into what could have left those scratches, how that could have happened, I'd love to know. Thanks.
Thank you, Alyssa. Well, lucky for everyone listening, I do have access to the words that Alyssa dared not to utter. Please, turn up your speakers and light a few candles. Serpentenes exercitande sunt ad predam mortuam addendum humanus est predea tutire angue. I'm just kidding. Those are just instructions on how to feed a pet snake, translated into Latin. Proof that anything sounds scary, read poorly in Latin. Now, all jokes aside, I was not able to find the story or the words that freaked Alyssa out. Now, I'd never heard of this game, Alyssa. Cat Scratch. How many of you played this game growing up? How many of you got the same results? And how many of you were freaked out, like Alyssa was? And how many of you have played with a Ouija board growing up? How many of you were brave enough to try it on Halloween? Well, our next caller has a Ouija board story that just might serve as a cautionary tale. Cheryl, out of Kansas. Welcome to tonight's program.
Hi, this is Cheryl from Kansas. I've got a story, actually. It's a series of events that happened to me. I'm 62 now, and this happened when I was probably somewhere between 11 and 13. I can't remember exactly when it was, but one evening my family was going over to my cousin's house, and my parents and my younger brother and sister went downstairs, and I went upstairs to find my cousin that was about my age. So I went upstairs and I found them in one of their bedrooms, and they had a Ouija board out, and my older cousin and one of her friends were messing around with the Ouija board, and my other cousin, who was closer to my age, was watching. So I just sat down and I was watching as they were messing with the Ouija board. And, you know, because it's been so long, I don't have a lot of the minute details, but the bigger things that happened are still very, very clear in my head. But they were apparently communicating on the Ouija board, and they were asking questions, and this was going on for quite a while, and it appeared that they were getting answers. And my older cousin who was doing this, she still kind of freaks me out. It became apparent that this was not a good entity, that it was something evil. So, you know, she was asking questions around that line, and at the kind of the peak of this, she said, "Well, show us who you are." And the Ouija board wrote out window. So my cousin and I, my younger cousin and I, who were watching, we went over to the window, and like I said, we were on the second floor bedroom. So we opened the windows. There were no screens or anything like that on the window. And we opened it up, and this is always a detail. I don't know why this is always interesting to me, but I live in Kansas, and we have these really wonderful big thunderstorms. And sometimes it will just be a deluge of rain. And after, the air is crisp and fresh, and it's kind of a weird thing how this happens. But I don't remember that it was raining or storming while I was up in my cousin's room. So my cousin and I were sitting in the window. We were just looking out, and all of a sudden we could hear, it was like a horse or something with hooved feet was walking up the road. And there was a big tree. They had a corner lot, so it was kind of a T. So we were looking out, and there was a big tree, so we couldn't really see anything further than the house across the street. But we could just hear this hooved animal. It sounded like a Clydesdale horse or something, just slowly walking up. And finally, we started to see, and it still freaks me out. There were two figures. Only one of them had the hooked feet. That they started walking up, and it was weird because it's just like they were having a normal kind of conversation. And they went to like the T in the road, and they just stood there. It was very strange, but the figure that really caught my attention with the hooked feet was very tall. I couldn't tell you how tall it was, but he had a very huge chest, and he had two horns coming out of his head. And I don't know what happened after that. I don't I don't know if I was just completely freaked out. I don't know, but it was just done. So that was that evening. A few weeks later, my cousin Janet came over to my house one evening. My parents weren't there, and I thought my cousin Joe, I will use his name because that's who I thought it was there with me. And my cousin, who was messing with the Ouija board, she's weird. And she came in, and we were in the living room, and my parents it's a very high ceiling, and they had like drapes that went from the top of the ceiling probably, I don't know, I'd say 9-10 feet to the floor. And again, I don't remember a lot of the details, but the one thing I do remember is that my cousin that was messing with the Ouija board, Janet, she said, I can make these curtains fly. And all of a sudden, I mean, there are storm windows on, permanent storms on these windows, so there's no air coming through this, that these curtains were flying out from the wall probably 6 or 7 feet. And I just remember that was just really crazy. So then not too far after that, I was at home by myself, and I was back in my bedroom. And all of a sudden I heard 2 male voices calling my name, just beckoning me to come out. Absolutely would not. I just shut my door and waited till my parents got home. So those were the 3 main events. So years later, I didn't talk about this with anyone because it's a weird story, and it's hard for me to believe that it happened. Needless to say, I wouldn't think anyone else would believe it either. They just think I'm a little bit of a nut. But years later, we were at my aunt's birthday party, and I had my 2 cousins that were there that night. We're sitting there, and I just needed to know. I just said, do you guys remember that night with the Ouija board? And they both just looked at me. It was just an absolute confirmation that they knew exactly what I was talking about. Not too long after that, my younger cousin, who I was standing with at the Ouija board, told me that after that happened, something was in their house. And they would see it up in the closet, hiding behind clothes and things. And they finally got a religious person to come over and do an exorcism. I don't know if they did it of the house or of my cousin, but if it was of my cousin, it didn't work because she still freaks me out. And then the last kind of confirmation I had was I was telling this story about the curtains at a family dinner in my parents' home. And I said, I thought my cousin Joe was with me. And my brother, he said, no, Cheryl, it was me. So that, these events it made me a believer in everything paranormal, and it still kind of freaks me out. I don't even like voicing that out loud. And so I'm sitting out on my back patio, so it's not going to be stuck in my house. If that sounds crazy. So that's what happened. Love your show. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Cheryl. Lots of hooved figures on the show these days. We had one last week that took place here in Southern California, and I think we might have had one the week before that. It's very deer woman, goat man, not deer, satyr, or devil-esque. And I love that the children heard these hooves before they saw them. just adds another element to the experience. And I'm not sure why, but that detail certainly resonated with me. And those curtains. How in the hell did the cousin move the curtains? And the voices trying to coax Cheryl back outside. This call seemed to have it all. And on a related note, Delaney did some digging and was able to find another instance in which a Ouija board session seemed to manifest some sort of creature. The following was pulled from a report sent in to phantomsandmonsters.com. I have seen a werewolf creature. It spoke to me and ran toward me. I was 14, so over 28 years ago. I had been using Ouija boards for weeks prior with my friend Angela and had contacted what we thought was a little girl named Emily Carter. My friends and I were out front of my house when our friend Michelle started skipping and acting like a young child. A very odd vibe was present. Angela and I called out to Emily, and with that, my hand on my heart and on my 3 children's lives, a large wolf figure appeared instead of my friend Michelle, levitated, and in this deep growling voice said, "Don't ever call me Emily Carter again." It then, at an intense speed, ran toward us. With that, it was gone and Michelle was back to normal. Now, I can't explain any of this activity, Cheryl, nor can I identify what was conjured up by the Ouija board, but I can tell you something similar has occurred before. And I can also tell you that I enjoyed this entry. So thank you for sharing it here with us. Now, folks, that brings us to tonight's finale. And one last sleepover story. Cheyenne, welcome to the program.
Hi, I'm Cheyenne. I'm 27 and I live in Michigan. I have so many stories I'd love to share. I've been seeing all sorts of things that are unexplainable ever since I was a child. Relatives coming to me who have passed away, aliens, creatures, all sorts of stuff. But I wanted to share a story because I've been hearing a lot of people on your episodes talk about beings with eyes that shine. So this story takes place in Michigan. I would say about 7 years old, and I was staying the night at a cousin's house. And so we all had our sleeping bags laid out on the living room floor. And this was probably early morning. I start to wake up and I peek out of my sleeping bag and I see rows of people sitting in the living room, on the living room floor. And they have these white, at the time they kind of looked like, white karate robe that was tied at the waist. And they're all sitting there cross-legged. I would say maybe about 3 rows of 5 people. So quite a lot of people. And one of their eyes were shining. And it wasn't just glowing, they were shining bright, like a flashlight. Bright white light. And obviously, as a child, I've seen a lot of freaky things. So my go-to move is to put my head back under the covers. And under the covers, I think for a second, what was that? So I look again. I peek slowly and I look again, and they are still there, sitting there. Their eye is shining bright. I don't know if it was the left or the right eye. And I decided to put my head back under the cover. This time I waited probably 5 minutes. I looked again and it was gone. And the next morning, once the day progressed, I told my mom about it and I told my cousins about it. No one really had anything more to offer. But that one has always stuck with me because I'm not sure what that was about, why only one eye was shining, who were they? Were they angels? Why were they sitting there? But I definitely wasn't having sleep paralysis because I was able to peek twice and they were still there. So just just a story I thought I would share. I'm excited to share more. Thank you so much for hosting the podcast. It's really exciting to listen to other people's stories. And yeah, thanks. Bye.
Thanks, Cheyenne, for the phone call. The Cyberdyne Systems Model 101, or the T-800, as it's otherwise known, has the capability to shine a red light or laser from a single eye. But I'm afraid that doesn't help us out much, given that the Terminator is a film series, and not yet real life. But outside of that reference, I'm at a loss for words here, Cheyenne. We did a lot of research and couldn't find much of anything that seemed to point to what you saw. So I'll turn this over to the audience. Perhaps someone listening has experienced something similar that could fill in some blanks. If so, give us a call, 888-6089. Whatever these robed, glowing-eyed entities were, it sounds like they made for a harrowing experience, Cheyenne. And we can't thank you enough for sharing those terrifying details with us. Now, folks, that's going to do it for this portion of the program. But trust me, you do not want to go anywhere. I have a lot more to offer up after a few announcements and a quick break. But first, Monsters Among Us podcast is written and produced by me, Derek Hayes. Copyright Red Crow Media. Additional support is provided by Sarah Carter Hayes and Delaney Bowers. All media used in this production is done so under the protection of fair use. Give us a like and follow on Instagram and Facebook. Give us a like and follow on YouTube as well. And while you're at it, please leave us a rate and review wherever that sort of thing is possible. Don't forget, you can catch Monsters Among Us on the UnX Network every Saturday at 11 p.m. Eastern. Just visit unxnetwork.com to learn more. And finally, tonight's score was provided by Iron Cthulhu Apocalypse, Co.ag Music, and Carl Casey at White Bat Audio. Now, if you're looking for more Halloween fun, I'm on this week's episode of A Psychic Story. The episode dropped earlier this week, so join Nicole and I as we discuss some of my spookiest calls I've shared to date. You can find that episode anywhere you get your podcast. And we've heard your requests. This week, we finally launched the brand new Monsters Among Us Discord server. Now all levels of Patreon can join with the exclusive invite link. See the latest Patreon post for details. And if you're not a Patreon member, now is the time to get on board. Now keep in mind, we're Discord newbies, so let us know if you have any suggestions on how to run the server. Also, since it's Halloween, don't forget to check out our film Shadows in the Desert, High Strangeness in the Borrego Triangle. Just visit borregotriangle.com for more information. And don't forget about Monsters Among Us Jr. on Wednesdays. Things are really starting to get good over there. We had aliens and Bigfoot last week. And ghosts, too, of course. Alright, folks, don't go anywhere. I'll be right back. But just in case you do, trick or treat, smell my feet, give me something good to eat. Keep it spooky and have yourselves a good night.
It's the most exciting week.
Hallmark's ready for Halloween.
Like a vampire. 15 minutes.
Now, kids, tonight's secret entry is a witchy little number from Violet in parts unknown.
Hi, this is Violet, and this is a story that really happened from when I was a teenager. And what happened was my girlfriend was staying over in our new house, and she really wasn't allowed to be with us. I don't know, my father thought she was a bad influence, but we were 10 times wilder than she was. But anyway, someone had given her a collection of books on witchcraft, like an encyclopedia collection. So being young girls, 14, 15, we became fascinated with witchcraft. So we started looking up spells, and we found this spell about how to make a warlock appear at your door. And it's rather bizarre, but we managed to do it. And what happened was we needed a kitchen pot and some straight pins, not clip pins, but straight pins. And someone had to urinate. A girl had to urinate on top of them, and we had to boil it. I know it sounds disgusting, but, you know, we're kids, so we're crazy. We're giggling the whole time we're doing it. So we're boiling this, and my mother wasn't well, and she's calling out from the other room, what is that horrible smell? What is that horrible smell? And we just said, oh, we burned something. And anyway, so we boil this urine, and then we're just, you know, we took it off the stove and put it aside, and we're sitting there, and all of a sudden the bell rings. So we go to the door, and there is this guy standing there with a mustache and beard with his car running in the middle of the street. And he says, I don't know why, but I just needed to stop here and ask if you know anything about, you know, this place I need to get to. I need directions. Now, this was a busy neighborhood. Houses were, you know, back-to-back, small houses, you know, ranches, cottages. And there would be no reason why he would stop in front of this house where we were and ask us this. And we freaked out. I mean, I'll never forget it. We freaked out. So we told her, get the witchcraft books out of the house, like, you know, take them away. We don't want to see them anymore. And it was really, really a scary, strange experience, and we probably should have been more scared than we were. But, you know, being young girls, we kind of were giggling about it, too. So that was my experience. It's a true experience, and thank you for your podcast.
Do you know how mad I would be if I found out someone pissed in one of my pots? I take my cooking very seriously. That's not an ingredient I want anywhere near my kitchen. But it's amazing stuff, Violet. Who was the man? And what are the chances that he would stop at that house at that exact moment? Was he conjured up by the girls, or was this all just one big coincidence? We tried to track down the book that Violet and her friends used, but had no luck. So if you have it, or you think you know what it is, hit us up or send us a picture of the page. We'll be happy to look at it. Until then, we thank you again, Violet, for the entry. And we thank you, listener, for hanging out with us this All Hallows evening. But the party does not have to stop here, because we're going beyond after this. The after show that's available on Apple subscriptions and Patreon. Just visit patreon.com, search for Monsters Among Us Podcast, join the $5 level, and you're in. Patreon also has the $1 level that delivers the main show ad-free if you're on a budget. Or you can go to our page on Apple Podcast and click the subscribe button there at the bottom of the page. And I apologize for all the announcements, but we have a lot to cover. This next and final announcement is for Patreon supporters who signed up with Apple Pay. We recently received a notice that Apple is going to start charging an additional 30% fee to anyone that is paying their monthly Patreon subscription with Apple Pay. To avoid this additional fee, we recommend you visit Patreon and change your payment method. You can also see a recent post on Patreon for details on how to do this. We appreciate your financial support, but we hate to see your hard-earned money go to the middleman. But no matter how you sign up, you want to get access to the beyond, because tonight's installment is one you do not want to miss. We're going to keep the Halloween theme going. I'm bringing in a couple of guests, and I'm going to read a piece of poetry that allegedly came from beyond the grave. And you can join us by signing up or by taking advantage of the 7-day free trial at either Patreon or Apple Podcast. So now, let's get into the beyond. And what's Halloween without a skeletal entity? Here to fill that quota, please join me in welcoming Raven from the Buckeye State of Ohio.
Hi, so my name is Raven. I'm originally from a small town in Ohio, like northern Ohio by Sandusky. If anyone knows that, like Cedar Point area. So we live right on the lake, and we were living with my grandpa. And it was just me and my mom in the house at the time. And she was getting ready for work, and I had like little plushy Beanie Babies, you know? And I was like counting them. I was probably 7 or 8, I would say. And it was morning, like noon at the latest, because she was getting ready for work. And I was just sitting there on the floor with my toys, and I wasn't scared or anything, you know, I was just chilling. And out of the corner of my right eye, I saw like these black boots. And I thought that was really weird because my mom was getting ready for work and she was wearing like her tennis shoes and work stuff, you know. So I look over and it's like these tall black boots, and I look up and it's this girl or woman, probably somewhere between 18 and like 20, like, you know, like a young woman. And she had like the skeleton face and long black hair.